birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jim. Happy birthday to you.
You know, Jim is the only guy I know that grew up partially on a farm in Edina, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, well, you know, it was there was outdoor toilet. We had a windmill out in the front of it, and you know, a barn and things like that. Which no electricity in the house, so it was odd for Edina as far as I'm concerned. Right now, the house we lived on right now, if you know Edina, it was on Highway 100, and the community center is there right now. It used to be a high school, yeah. And that's where our house used to be. We had a 15-acre farm, and Dad would grow, we had chickens, and Dad would grow like vegetables and things like that, take them around to the grocery store, and take the eggs around to people's houses and things like that. So, yeah.
And you graduated from Roosevelt High School.
Roosevelt High School. One interesting thing about that was, but I didn't graduate as James Rasmussen. I graduated as Roger Rasmussen because there was in our neighborhood I was James Roger, and the next door boy was James Robert, and the guy across the street was James, and the guy next door to him across the street was James also. So the guy next door next to me, he went by Bob or Robert all the time. And the guy across the street was James, and the guy closer down was Jimmy. So that was how we kept track of the four of us there.
Jim, you were also in Korea. Can you talk about when you re-enlisted?
After the war was over, of course, like everybody else, I got out of the service, and I had worked, I think, kind of switched around on several different jobs for about 2 years there. And the place I was living at, there happened to be a recruiter living 2 doors down from me, and he found out I'd been in the military, and he offered me a deal. He said he could get me back in the service as a non-commissioned officer. So I took it, and I went back in the service then, and of course one of the first places I ended up was over in Japan, and I was in Japan in 1950 when the North Koreans invaded, and we were one of the first units then that went over into Korea. I was with a F-51 outfit at that time, and we were servicing the 51 aircraft then. And we went over to Korea, and of course we got chased out of Korea and went back to Japan. Then when we went back after the landings at Incheon, we went up to North Korea. And when the Chinese came in, we got chased out of there and ended up down in the south of Korea at Busan, where we spent a year there. And at the same time, my 2 daughters and my wife at that time were living in Japan. They had just arrived in Japan at the time that the North Koreans had invaded. So they spent more time in Japan than I did because I was over in Korea for almost a year while they were in Japan. So, yeah, the 2 daughters are here today. This is Susan over here. She's a military retired. She spent 30 years in the National Guard. And then that's Marcia standing alongside of her, yeah. So.
Jim, you were in the cadet program. Can you talk about how you became a navigator in the B-17?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I was still in high school when the war broke out, and a couple of us guys, we were going to go down and we were going to join the Navy. But at that time I was 17, and I had to have my parents sign for me. So my parents wouldn't sign for me because they said you got 6 months left to go to high school. You can, after you graduate, then you can start thinking about that. And they said, and anyway, you'll probably get drafted by the time you finish high school. Well, it didn't work out quite that way. A friend asked me to, when I finished high school, a friend asked me to go to work with him, and so we worked for about a year, and then the president sent me an invitation, and I joined up with the rest of them at that time. So, and at the basic training camp we were at, they were looking for cadets. They want to know if anybody wanted to go to cadets, and I thought, sure, I'll sign up for that. I thought I was going to be a pilot then. And so we went through the cadet program, went out to California for classification, and out there they had 1,500 people waiting to go to pilot training school, and nobody signed up to go to the Navigator school. So they went through all the records, and they picked out 400 of us that had the highest scores on our records and sent us to navigation school. So I always like to mention that to pilots, that I was just too smart to be a pilot.
Jim, you were in Hollywood last week,
Yeah.
and you met Tom Hanks.
Yeah. Well, we shook hands. I guess that's about to a meeting. You know, he went down the line shaking hands. So I guess. Yeah.
There were 3 other 100th bomb group.
Right. Yeah. There was only primarily the film that we were previewing at the time. It was called Masters of the Air, and I noticed there's several books here by Masters of the Air, and. The film is primarily about the 100th Bomb Group, although it does touch on some of the other military outfits in that were over in the 8th Air Force at the time. But and of course the people that were at the reunion, we were all from the 100th Bomb Group, veterans of the 100th Bomb Group. That was all we could get together was 4 of us surviving that had remained from the 100th Bomb Group. There's a few more on our roster, but they're not capable for traveling. So, we had just had a reunion of our 100th Bomb Group in May and June up in Savannah, where the 8th Air Force Eighth Air Force Museum is at, and so that was there was only 4 of us at that one too, that people could make it to that reunion. One of the nice things about that was over in England there's an organization called the 100 Air Refueling Unit, and it's kind of, they're the only organization in the Air Force that can carry the same symbols on the tail, a square D, that signifies the 100th Bomb Group. Interesting thing. Those pilots are all qualified for more than just being pilots. I noticed that they all wore 2 wings, and the small wing was for parachuting. And I told them that, well, parachuting was on my bucket list, and they said, well, come on over to England, we'll sign you up for a buddy jump. And I had my advisor standing there going, so anyway, I can't find my passport either anymore. I think the buddy jump is out though. That's I know one of the presidents jumped at 90, but they figure 100 is probably stretching the limits.
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
You said before you had been in Munich. A few years ago, you were there with your wife in Munich.
Yes.
And you had also bombed Munich.
Oh yeah. Well, during the war, we had at least one mission that bombed some areas of Munich or the airport outside of Munich. I don't
But
remember.
how did you feel about that when you were visiting the city? And because I lived in that area at the time when you were bombing us, and I wanted to know, how did you feel when you were walking around Munich and that, about the fact that you had bombed it? I know it was your job. I mean, I'm not saying.
Well, I had at the end of the war, we had flown into Munich, and I had an opportunity to see the damage and whatnot that had been done, and I know that was pretty much all in rubble. And then when my wife and I went and visited there in '85, of course, it was all rebuilt.
Yeah.
And it was back to looking normal again. And the beer halls and the Oktoberfest was just as nice as it had ever been, I guess. I'm Prosit. So, but yeah, I can't remember that I really had any really feelings about it, one way or the other. I just was amazed at the type of damage that had been done to the city and the way it had been rebuilt, like a few years later. It was quite amazing. Yeah. It was interesting. So.
You arrived in Europe in December of '44, and you flew how many missions?
Yeah, I got there in December of '44, and then I flew 32 missions. My crew flew 33 missions, but I took my birthday off on one mission there. Actually, I ended up in the hospital, so it happened to be on my birthday, so yeah, which is another celebration right now. So anyway, so I ended up flying 32 missions, and then there was just on April 20th we flew our last mission. There wasn't much of anything left to for bombers to strike at that time. So the fighter planes were still supporting the ground troops, but the bombers didn't have anything to bomb anymore.
Jim, talk about your last few missions into Holland.
The Chow Hound. Can you talk about Chow Hound?
And of course, then we had flown at towards the end of the war, because Market Garden had been such a failure and whatnot. The Germans were retaliating by holding up food supplies and going into Holland also. So we made a special arrangement with the Germans as long as we flew certain corridors and stayed within certain areas at low altitudes and things that we could fly in and drop food. So on 2 of those missions, we flew in at about 300 to 400 feet above ground, and it was interesting to see that you could see the German soldiers standing alongside the roads and their equipment, their tanks and trucks, and standing there, and it's quite interesting. And of course, once my unit dropped, I think it was seven different times in there, but I only went on 2 because everybody in the outfit wanted to go on these low altitude missions because it was like, in a sense, like a sightseeing tour in a sense. So.
How many died of starvation? It was a lot.
Oh yeah, well during that winter of 44 and 45, I think they say that something like 25,000 Dutch people died of starvation during that winter, and so it was really tough on the Dutch then. I still get just this past Christmas I got a little card from some of the people over in Holland, which is nice, yeah.
Of all of the things that you've accomplished, what are you most proud of?
Marcia.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things I'm most proud of, I think, is the fact that I've got this far. It's one of those things I never thought I would do. And then I always got to thinking, normally when you celebrate something at 100th year, it's a memorial, it's not. So I'm going to look at it this way: this 100th year that has gone by, we'll have that as a memorial, and then the next years coming up, we'll celebrate that. That'll be a celebration. And of course, I got a head start on that too, because I just got a new pacemaker, and the doctor said that's going to last you 12 years. And then on top of that, he gave me a bonus. He said the next one is free. Isn't that a good justification? Make sure you collect free. That really gets you stimulated.
Any other questions? You want to add anything, Jim?
No. One of these days, I'm going to ask you to sing Maria Lane.
Lily Marlene?
Yeah.
No, you don't want to ask me.
Sure. That was one of the things I enjoyed, I think, mostly when I was in England sometime, was when you'd go into the pubs and there was a lot of group singing at that time. And one of the things that surprised me the most about the group singing, one of the most popular songs that people would sing over there was Beer Barrel Polka. And I thought, it's a kind of odd, that's an American song, but everybody, was a great bar song to sing in. And of course, every time the bars would close, there was always that one, We'll Meet Again, which is a very well-known song.
Well, I want to just say one thing to you. I grew up over there as a little child, and when you guys came into our area, when the 4th Armored came into our area, we were just crazy. I mean, we were nuts because we were so thankful that you finally came and you rescued us.
Well, that's wonderful.
And I want to thank you for that.
I've met a couple other ladies that were in Germany at that time. One of them married to a guy in the unit that I was in, and she says the first thing she ever saw of an American was a tank came into town, and it was driven by a black soldier, and she thought all Americans were black then. That's what she went home and told her. She said, Americans are all black.
And you also taught us how to chew gum, which we never heard of before. We never saw gum. We didn't know what gum was like.
Really?
And when you gave us gum, we ate it. And we swallowed it.
And the dentists were all really happy about us serving all that sweet stuff to you, I suppose. And I went, and one other German girl I met, the ball turret that was on our crew, was dating a German girl when we had dinner with them one time some years ago. So it was, and she had been in Berlin at the time, and she said that was the thing. They'd go to work in the morning, and then when they'd come back home, it was always whether or not their house was still going to be there. So. It was interesting. So.
Jim, what's your impression of the Masters of the Air?
Well, one of the things is I look at things sometimes too technically. I guess is what it amounts to.
We all do.
Yeah, and they had the sequence. I thought they didn't have the sequence done in the very first section. Quite the way I would like to have seen it. And then, of course, then they were carrying all the ammunition and all the machine guns on when they flew the planes from the United States to Europe, and I thought they never would have carried all that extra weight along, on a long distance flight like that. And so there was a couple different things that but it was interesting. Yeah, it's a war movie. It's not a documentary. It's a story that's placed on true facts and things, but there's some liberties are taken with it and whatnot, so you got to look at it in that sense. Yeah.
Jim, on March 10, 2023, Jim was awarded the French Legion of Honor, which is the highest award that they can award in France. The Consul General in Chicago, French Consul General in Chicago did that, and we're planning on March 15th to have a reception. The French consulate from Chicago, French consulate from Chicago is coming here, so we're planning on doing a reception so that they can re-award
Friday,
that,
March 15th, 11 to 1 here.
11 to 1 here.
That's on a Friday?
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions?
See,
Go ahead.
do you have any navigating stories? Any stories where you have to put all that knowledge to work?
Well, surprisingly, I kind of think the very first mission I was on was the only time I really had to, being the fact that I was not a lead navigator, and you know, when you're the fourth, fifth airplane in a squadron or something, you just follow along. And normally when I would follow along, there'd be a few times I would wonder where in the hell the lead was going. You know, I thought they're not going in the right direction. So. But on the very first mission we were on, we ran out of oxygen when we were over the target. We dropped the bombs and we ran out of oxygen. We had carry-around bottles that lasted us for the next 20 minutes or so until we could get down to lower altitude. And then we got down to lower altitude, then the pilot decided we didn't have enough gas to get back to our base, and it was totally undercast underneath us. You couldn't see the ground. It was totally covered altogether. And so he said, I'm going to need an airport. Well, I told him, I said, the best thing I can do is I can put you on a signal that can tell you where to do an instrument letdown. And of course, we got right on the signal, and then right at that time, here there was a hole in the clouds, and right below us was an airport, which we landed at, and they told us at that airport if we had gone to the one that was for the instrument letdown, why, we probably would have been shoved off the runway into the mud, and we might not have gotten our airplanes out again if it froze down there. So I kind of look at that was the once and only time that I really had to use some navigation skill. Although there was a few other times when we got separated from the squadron, we had to come back home alone. But that's, you know, relatively easy when you're say in Germany. You know, you just head west and you'll hit England. You know, that's about what it amounts to. Didn't take a lot of skill to do that. So.
You were based at Thorpe's Abbott?
Thorpe Abbott was the name of it, yes. Yeah. And that's yeah, all the Air Force bases were listed. Were the bomber base were up there in what was called like the Warsh area, and I think there was something like 40 plus bomber bases up in that area. Once in a while, when you take off in the morning, you'd fly over some other base and you could see the planes from the other places taking off. One of the people asked me once in a while if I ever had a scary mission, and one of the things that scared me the most one time was we had to take off, and it was completely overcast. Bad weather was real bad, and all the planes, 12 planes in the squadron, would go to what was an assembly beacon. And then they would fly around that beacon until they assembled into formation. Well, this time the clouds were so thick when we were flying around in there, and when you'd see a shadow kind of go flashing by you, you'd think, whoops, that was an airplane, you know. And a couple of different times that happened. It really scared you when you see that other plane that came back that close to you at the time. We had to go up to, I think, 18,000 feet before we got clear and got into formation that day.
So on a typical mission day, you were up at like 0300?
I don't remember it quite that early, but it was early in the morning. But the thing was, we never took off until we had some light, and of course, in the wintertime, that had to be up in at least at 7 o'clock or something. English time, I think, was a little bit different as far as I remember it. So I think it was closer, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. You would get up and go to chow, and then get your briefing and get lined up to take off. You know, so.
How did you stay warm at altitude?
Well, we had we were there, and of course we had electric suits. We could plug the boots in. We had electric gloves and. You know, and the rest of the suit was just a lightweight suit that had electric cords and whatnot. So basically, I would just wear, because you kind of planned on maybe that you were going to stay in Germany a while, so you usually wore your best uniform or one of your better uniforms, and then you had your flight suit over that. and then maybe a jumpsuit over that. But, that was about the only thing we were. The guys that were in the back, the gunners that were by the big windows in back, they had to wear the big sheepskins because they were getting in the breeze back there, and whereas up in the front, why we were fairly insulated from any breeze coming through, so it wasn't that bad. I remember all I wore on my hand was a nylon glove, and of course the fact that I had the rest of my suit was warm. My hand never got cold. I had, just because I had to keep a pencil occupied there for a while.
A typical
Jim, was your-
mission was how long, time-wise?
Well, it was run about seven plus a few minutes or so, about 7 hours is what it was. But lots of times there would be like 2 to 3 hours involved in assembly. Not only just getting your own squadron together, then you had to get the group together, and then you had to get in line with the division, and then you got in line with the Air Force. And so it took just a couple hours just to get in formation, is what it amounted to. And then sometimes the mission would be only 4 to 5 hours on the actual time that you flew.
See, Jim, Larry Bachman used to talk about the first time he ever saw a 262. Was your formation ever attacked by an ME-262?
Oh yeah, sure.
What did you ever see? What happened the first time you encountered 262s?
Well, that was one of the only airplanes I ever had an opportunity to shoot at. When I first met up with a B-17, it was the first time I found out that the Navigator was supposed to take care of 2 50 caliber machine guns. I'd never seen a machine gun before that. And some of the other gunners showed me a little bit about it. And so, the only time I had an opportunity to shoot the one was to shoot at a couple of the 262s as they were flying away from us. The other time I had the opportunity to shoot at a German aircraft, 109, FE-109, or not, a Mercedes 109. Yeah. And they were trying to ram us that day. In fact, they did ram one of the planes in the formation and took off the, kind of split the rudder and cut the fuselage up and knocked one of the horizontal stabilizers off. But he made it back all right. And the one came up alongside of us and looked to me like he was going to try and put his wing into our wing. They had been told to ram us, but only ram us and then bail out. They weren't like the Japanese were taught to actually commit suicide. The Germans weren't taught to do that. They were just taught to ram us. They had a lot of airplanes. They had a lot of unskilled pilots, and so. Anyway, so this one time I could see the guy came up and he stalled out right alongside of us. And normally when you're flying in an airplane, you never see the enemy. You only see his equipment. You see his airplanes or something like that, but you never see the person. And this was the first time I saw a person sitting in an airplane, which was kind of a shock to me. I had my big 50 caliber machine gun pointed right at me, and I pulled the trigger and it was unsafe. So maybe this is one of those things they talk about. Did the Lord have anything to do with what was happening that day? And I think the Lord was with that guy in that airplane that day. So.
How long were you in Europe?
I was in we went over there in December, and then we headed back in September, so it was only like 10 months in Europe. And I came back, and then of course when I got back, I got out of the service, and then a couple years later, re-enlisted. I ended up in Korea during that conflict, and then I had, we were servicing 51s at that time. After that, I was in, I think, I'd have to count them up, 5, 6 different units that never had an airplane in the unit. I was with the radar unit, I was with the recruiting units, I was with different units. I never, Auditor General and things like that. I was stationed twice in Minneapolis, all things, you know, that they get stationed twice in Minneapolis. Twice in Washington DC area. So I had some good assignments and things like that, but it was interesting. Then at the very end, they were looking for people to go to Vietnam, and I had enough time. I had over 20 years of service at that time, so I decided to retire then because I had talked to a few people that had been over to Vietnam, and it didn't sound like the place to go to, so I decided time to retire. So.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.